"The nursery belongs to my sister now," the Duke announced, before the entire household. "A barren woman has no use for it." Clara Ashbourne stood beneath the painted ceiling she had designed for the children she had lost. Tiny golden stars glimmered above her, each one placed according to a constellation she had copied from her late father's astronomical charts. Once Edmund had stood beside her in that unfinished room and promised that their child would learn the names of every star. Now he would not even look at her. 2 footmen lifted the walnut cradle from its place beside the window. Its carved wooden moon struck the doorframe as they carried it into the corridor. "Careful," Clara said instinctively. Lady Honora Ashbourne laughed softly. She stood beside her brother with one hand resting upon the swell of her pregnancy. Her morning gown, worn since her husband's death 8 months earlier, had been altered with expensive black lace purchased from Clara's household allowance. "It is only furniture," Honora said. "My child will require something less melancholy." The assembled servants lowered their eyes. The housekeeper, Mrs. Bell, looked as though she had been slapped, but no one dared contradict the Duke of Raventon. Clara turned to Edmund. "You summoned the entire household to witness this?" "I summoned them so there would be no confusion about the new arrangements." His voice was controlled, almost cold enough to disguise his resentment. Almost. During their first 4 years of marriage, Clara had conceived 3 times. The first child had been lost before quickening. The second had lived only long enough for Clara to feel him move beneath her hand. The third, a son, had supposedly been born without breath 7 months earlier. Edmund had entered her room only once after that confinement. He had stood at the foot of her bed while she trembled with fever and asked why she had failed him again. Now he removed a ring of household keys from his coat. "Honora will supervise the nursery and the domestic accounts until her child is born," he declared. "She will also hold the chapel key and control access to the family records." A murmur moved through the servants. The accounts were not ceremonial. Clara had spent 5 years reorganizing Raventon's debts, renegotiating grain contracts, and preventing 2 tenant farms from foreclosure. Edmund had praised her intelligence when it saved his estate. He called it interference whenever it challenged his wishes. "You cannot name Honora's child your heir by moving her into this room," Clara said. "Succession is governed by law, not furniture." Honora's smile sharpened. Edmund finally met Clara's eyes. "My sister carries the nearest prospect this family has. You will not poison this occasion with your bitterness. My concern is not bitterness. The marriage settlement has produced no living child." The words struck more deeply because he spoke them without raising his voice. Mrs. Bell took 1 step toward Clara, but the steward caught her arm. Edmund placed the keys in Honora's waiting palm. Their metal edges flashed in the afternoon light. "Your allowance will also be reviewed," he continued. "There is no reason to maintain separate charitable expenses when Honora must prepare for confinement." Clara understood the threat immediately. Without her allowance, the village school and the widow's dispensary would close within a month. Nearly 40 families depended upon accounts Edmund had never bothered to examine. "You are punishing tenants and children because I questioned you. I am correcting years of indulgence." Honora closed her fingers around the keys. "Do try to accept this gracefully, Clara. Grief has made you possessive." One of the footmen shifted the cradle again. As its base passed through the doorway, something pale caught beneath the lower brass hinge. A strip of linen. Clara recognized the embroidery at once. 3 blue loops surrounding a white cross. It was the personal mark of Agnes Pike, the midwife who had attended Clara's last confinement. Clara's breath stopped. Mrs. Pike had disappeared 2 days after the birth. Edmund's physician, Dr. Vale, claimed the woman had died of a sudden fever while traveling north. Her few possessions had reportedly been burned to prevent contagion, yet the linen beneath the hinge was clean. Its severed edge remained crisp, and one corner bore a faint brown stain. Clara moved toward it. Honora stepped between her and the door. "You heard my brother. This is no longer your room." "I dropped something. Then a servant may retrieve it." Before Clara could answer, wheels thundered over the gravel outside. The sound was too swift and heavy for an ordinary visitor. A moment later, a groom shouted in the courtyard. Edmund frowned. "I gave orders that we were not receiving callers." The front doors opened below. Men's boots crossed the marble hall, followed by the sharp strike of a staff against the floor. The steward hurried to the nursery landing, his face drained of color. "Your Grace," he said, "a royal messenger has arrived." Honora's hand tightened over the keys. "With whom?" Edmund asked. The steward glanced at Clara before answering. "Mrs. Agnes Pike." Silence fell so completely that Clara heard the linen tear beneath the hinge as the cradle shifted again. Honora turned toward the fireplace. For the first time that afternoon, triumph vanished from her face. The elderly midwife climbed the stairs between two royal guards. She wore a plain gray cloak, and a livid bruise ran from her temple to her jaw. In both hands she carried a locked black case marked with the crown seal. Edmund stepped forward. "This woman was reported dead." "I was meant to be," Mrs. Pike replied. She stopped before Clara and bowed, not to the Duke, but to her. Then she handed the royal messenger a folded order. He broke the wax and read aloud. "By authority of the crown, no alteration shall be made to the recognized succession of Raventon before midnight. No record of birth, death, baptism, or marriage shall be removed or destroyed. Lady Clara Ashbourne is to retain access to all family archives until the enclosed testimony has been heard." Honora backed toward the nursery. Clara saw her glance at the strip of linen beneath the hinge. Mrs. Pike saw it too. "Do not let her close that door," the midwife cried. "What was hidden after her Grace's confinement is still inside that room." Honora lunged for the nursery door. Clara caught her wrist before she could reach it. The household gasped. Honora stared at Clara's hand as though a servant had touched her. Then she twisted sharply, but Clara did not release her. "If there is nothing hidden inside," Clara said, "you have no reason to close the door." Edmund seized Clara's arm. "Let go of my sister. Tell her to release the keys. This is my house, and the crown has just forbidden anything within it from being concealed or destroyed." For a moment, husband and wife stood inches apart. Clara saw anger in his face, but beneath it lay something less certain. Edmund had expected tears, perhaps pleading. He had not expected her to invoke royal authority before the servants he had assembled to humiliate her. Mrs. Pike broke the silence. "Your Grace, if Lady Honora enters that room alone, the evidence will disappear." Honora pulled free. "Evidence of what?" "This woman is plainly deranged. She claims to have escaped death, arrives wearing a bruise, and expects us to believe some melodrama about a nursery." The midwife lifted her chin. "That bruise came from the man your brother's physician sent to silence me." Edmund's hand fell from Clara's arm. "Dr. Vale told me you died of fever. Dr. Vale lies with the ease of a man who has been well paid." The Duke's expression hardened. "Take care. I took too much care, Your Grace. That was my sin." Mrs. Pike turned to Clara. Shame transformed her lined face. "After your son was born, I heard him cry. He was weak, but alive. Dr. Vale ordered me from the room while he treated your bleeding. When I returned, the child was gone." Clara felt the corridor tilt beneath her. "No." The word barely escaped her. "I asked you whether he had breathed. You were fevered. Dr. Vale stood behind me, and the Dowager Duchess was at the door." Mrs. Pike's voice broke. "I told you what they commanded me to say." Edmund stepped between them. "My mother would never harm an Ashbourne heir." "Then ask why she paid me £50 to leave Raventon that same night." Honora made a small sound of outrage, but Clara's attention remained fixed upon the midwife. "Where is my child?" "I do not know." The answer struck harder than any certainty of death. Mrs. Pike reached toward her, but Clara stepped back. Compassion from the woman who had lied beside her blood-soaked bed felt unbearable. "Then why return now?" "Because someone tried to murder me after I sent a letter to the palace. And because I finally learned why they needed everyone to believe your son had died." The royal messenger raised one hand. "The testimony must be taken formally. First, this room must be secured." He ordered the guards to stand at both ends of the corridor. Edmund's solicitor, Mr. Harcourt, was summoned as an independent witness. Mrs. Bell brought sealing wax and clean linen while the servants were dismissed one by one. Honora attempted to leave with them. "No," Clara said. "You wanted authority over this room. You will remain while it is searched. I am with child. I will not endure an interrogation. You endured my public humiliation without difficulty. Edmund looked sharply at Clara, but she had already knelt beside the brass hinge. She drew out the torn strip of linen with 2 fingers. Mrs. Pike recognized it immediately. That came from the cloth used to wrap your son. Clara unfolded it carefully. The brown stain was larger on the hidden side, and near the torn edge, someone had stitched a single letter in faded blue thread. See, my initial? Clara asked. No. Mrs. Pike's face tightened. It marked the child as the Countess's responsibility. What Countess? Before the midwife could answer, a crash sounded from inside the nursery. Everyone turned. The room was empty. At least, it should have been. One royal guard drew his pistol. The other pushed the door fully open, while Edmund moved instinctively in front of Honora. Clara entered behind the messenger. The cradle had been abandoned near the center of the room. One of its carved side panels now hung loose, exposing a narrow hollow within the wood. Something had fallen from it, a small leather ledger. Clara bent to retrieve it, but Edmund reached the object first. Give it to the messenger, she said. I will examine whatever is found in my own family's cradle. You have already transferred this room to Honora and tried to remove my access to its records. You are not an impartial witness. His jaw tightened. You accuse me now? I remind you of what you did less than an hour ago. Edmund stared at her, confronted by the first consequence of his own announcement. At last, he surrendered the ledger to the royal messenger. The book contained only 6 pages. Each recorded a payment made during the week of Clara's confinement. Money to Dr. Vale, to Mrs. Pike, to 2 unidentified coachmen, and to a woman listed only as the Countess. The final payment was accompanied by a chilling notation for receiving the living male child and securing his removal before the Duke is informed. Edmund read the line twice. I was never told, he said. Clara looked at him. You never asked. His face went still. It was true. He had not visited the birthing room. He had not requested to see his son's body. When Clara begged for an investigation after Mrs. Pike vanished, he accused her of clinging to grief because she could not accept her failure. Honora pressed both hands against her belly. A mysterious ledger hidden in a cradle proves nothing. Anyone could have written it. Clara turned the book toward the window. The figures had been entered in 2 different inks. 5 payments bore the Dowager Duchess's mark. The 6th carried Honora's signature. Clara raised her eyes. Honora's expression did not change, but the keys slipped from her fingers and struck the floor. Mrs. Pike whispered, she was the one who carried him out. Edmund looked from the signature to his sister. Tell me that is not your hand. Honora backed away. Then, from somewhere behind the nursery wall, a baby began to cry. The cry came again, thin, frightened, unmistakably real. Clara crossed the nursery before anyone could stop her. She pressed both palms against the paneled wall, listening. The sound seemed to come from behind the painted moon above the empty hearth. There is no room beyond that wall, Edmund said. There is a servant's passage, Mrs. Bell replied. It was sealed before His Grace inherited. Clara examined the carved paneling. Years of managing Raventon had taught her to notice details others dismissed. A repaired hinge, a figure copied incorrectly, an expense that appeared twice in a ledger. One golden star beside the moon had been polished more often than those surrounding it. She pressed it. A narrow section of the wall opened inward. Cold air flowed from the darkness, carrying the scent of warm milk. Clara seized a candle and entered before the guards. The passage was scarcely wide enough for her shoulders. Dust covered the floor except for a line of recent footprints. At the far end stood a small iron stove, a chair, and a basket lined with blankets. Inside lay a crying infant. Clara stopped breathing. The child appeared 6 or 7 months old. Dark curls clung to his damp forehead, and his face was red from crying. Around one tiny wrist was a blue silk ribbon embroidered with 3 golden stars, the same constellation Clara had painted above the nursery ceiling before his birth. She had tied that ribbon herself. My son. The word emerged as a broken whisper. She lifted him from the basket. He struggled for only an instant before settling against her chest, his fingers closing around the edge of her gown. Every part of Clara began to shake. She searched his face for something she recognized, desperate and terrified of believing too quickly. His eyes were gray like Edmund's. Near his left ear lay a crescent-shaped birthmark identical to the one on Clara's shoulder. Edmund entered the passage behind her. He looked at the child and went completely still. Clara turned away from him. "Do not touch him. Clara, you surrendered his nursery an hour ago. You announced another child as your probable heir without asking whether ours had truly died. Do not touch him until I know what part you played in this." Pain crossed Edmund's face, but she felt no obligation to soften the accusation. His ignorance had not been innocent. He had chosen not to investigate because blaming her had been easier. Mrs. Pike approached slowly. The moment she saw the child's left hand, she began to weep. "The smallest finger," she said. "Look at it." The finger curved slightly inward. "He was born that way. I recorded it in my original notes." "Where are those notes?" the royal messenger asked. Dr. Vale took them. Honora remained at the entrance to the nursery. Her face had become as pale as the lace at her throat. "This proves nothing," she said. "Any abandoned child could have been placed there." The infant turned at the sound of her voice. His body stiffened. Then he began screaming. Honora instinctively stepped back. Clara held him closer, murmuring until the cries diminished. Beneath the child's blanket, she found a freshly prepared bottle, 2 folded cloths, and a small paper packet containing gray powder. Mrs. Pike smelled it without touching the contents. Laudanum mixed with chalk, enough to keep him quiet for hours. Clara looked toward Honora. "How long has he been hidden here? I have never seen that child. Your signature appears beside the payment for his removal. A signature can be forged. Then you will have no objection to having your writing examined." Honora's mouth tightened. The royal messenger ordered one guard to search the hidden passage while the other secured every entrance to the house. Mrs. Bell was sent for warm water and clean clothing. Clara carried the child into the nursery, refusing to surrender him even when her arms began to ache. Edmund followed at a distance. "What will you call him?" he asked quietly. Clara looked at him in disbelief. "He already has a name." She had chosen it during the 7th month of her pregnancy, when Edmund still sometimes sat beside her in the evenings and spoke as though they were building a future together. "Nathaniel," she said, "you agreed to it." Edmund lowered his eyes. "I remember." "Then remember everything else. Remember that I asked to see his body. Remember that I begged you to question Vale. Remember what you called me." His face tightened. "I called you hysterical. You said grief had made me selfish. You said I was trying to punish you for needing an heir. I was wrong. You were willing to be wrong." That distinction silenced him. A guard emerged from the passage carrying a travel cloak and a set of muddy boots. Mrs. Bell recognized them as belonging to Lucy Hale, Honora's personal maid. "Find her," the messenger ordered. The steward returned moments later with alarming news. Lucy's room had been emptied, and a kitchen boy had seen her ride toward the northern gate shortly before the royal carriage arrived. Honora exhaled too quickly. Clara noticed. "So your maid hid my child without your knowledge? I cannot answer for a servant's crimes. You signed her wage increase 3 days after my confinement. I reward loyalty. To whom?" Honora pressed one hand to her abdomen and suddenly bent forward with a gasp. Edmund rushed toward her. "What is it? The child. Something is wrong." Mrs. Pike moved to examine her, but Honora recoiled. "Not that woman. You need a midwife," Edmund said. "I need Dr. Vale." Clara saw the mistake the instant Honora spoke his name. The physician had supposedly left Raventon weeks earlier. No one had told Honora where he had gone, or so she had previously claimed. Mrs. Pike's gaze sharpened. "You know where Vale is." Honora looked toward the door. The royal guard blocked it. A shot exploded outside. The nursery window shattered, spraying glass across the floor. Edmund threw himself over Honora while Clara turned her body around Nathaniel. A bullet struck the cradle, splintering the carved wooden moon. From the courtyard came the furious pounding of hooves. The second guard ran to the broken window. "A rider is escaping through the eastern orchard." Clara looked down. The damaged cradle panel had split completely open. Inside its hollow compartment lay a folded letter bearing Dr. Vale's seal, and beneath it, a certificate declaring that Nathaniel Ashbourne had died 7 months earlier. It was dated tomorrow. The certificate trembled between Clara's fingers. Nathaniel Ashbourne, lawful son of Edmund and Clara Ashbourne, Duke and Duchess of Raventon, had allegedly died of a sudden seizure on the 2nd of May, tomorrow. Below Dr. Vale's signature was a blank space reserved for a second witness. "They intended to kill him tonight," Clara said. The words silenced the room. Edmund took the certificate and examined the seal. "This is Vale's mark." Honora remained beside the fireplace, one hand pressed to her abdomen. Her earlier pain appeared to have vanished. The royal messenger unfolded the letter found beneath the certificate. It contained only 3 lines. "The royal inquiry has begun sooner than expected. Complete the certificate before midnight. Once the boy is buried under his lawful name, the widow's child may be recognized without dispute." The letter was addressed to Lady H. Every eye turned toward Honora. "There are dozens of ladies whose names begin with H," she said. "Only one of them was given this nursery today," Clara replied. Honora's expression sharpened. "You are eager to condemn me because you cannot bear that my brother still cares for me. This is not a contest for his affection. Someone stole my son, drugged him, and prepared to murder him. You do not even know that child is yours." Nathaniel stirred against Clara's shoulder. His small hand had tangled in the chain around her neck. Clara kissed his dark curls and felt 7 months of buried grief transform into something harder than anger. "Then we will establish his identity lawfully," she said. "Until that happens, he remains under my protection." Edmund stepped closer. "Our protection." "No." The answer stopped him. "You publicly stripped me of authority and placed Honora over this household," Clara continued. "If the royal messenger had arrived an hour later, she would have controlled the nursery, the chapel records, and every servant with access to Nathaniel. Your decision nearly delivered him back to the people who hid him. I did not know he was here. You knew there were questions surrounding his death. You chose not to ask them." Edmund looked toward Honora, perhaps expecting his sister to offer an explanation that would rescue them both. She gave him none. The royal messenger sealed the forged death certificate, Vale's letter, the ledger, and the drug packet inside his case. Mr. Harcourt recorded where each item had been found and who had touched it. Clara insisted that Nathaniel be examined by a physician independent of Raventon. The messenger dispatched a guard to fetch Dr. Samuel Reed from the neighboring village, while Mrs. Pike prepared warm milk under Mrs. Bell's supervision. No food, medicine, or cloth was permitted near the child without Clara's approval. That order was the first authority she exercised in the nursery after Edmund had taken it from her. No one challenged it. A stable boy soon brought news from the eastern orchard. The escaping rider had abandoned his horse beside an old hunting lodge and disappeared into the woods. Blood marked the saddle, suggesting the guard's return shot had struck him. Edmund ordered his men to search the estate. Clara stopped him before he left. "Not men chosen by Honora or your mother. My steward has served this family for 20 years, and during those years someone reopened a hidden passage, kept an infant behind this wall, and carried laudanum through your household unnoticed." The steward flushed. Edmund's pride warred visibly with the truth. At last, he allowed the royal messenger to choose the search party. Honora laughed without humor. "So Clara commands Raventon now?" "No," Clara said. "Evidence commands it." Mrs. Pike brought the milk. Nathaniel drank greedily, one tiny hand resting against Clara's fingers. With every swallow, the reality of him settled more deeply inside her. He was alive. Yet someone had cared for him enough to keep him fed and clean. The bottle found beside him had still been warm. Whoever tended him could not have gone far. Clara examined the hidden passage again. Near the iron stove, she discovered fine gray ash, a sewing needle, and several strands of red wool. One of the folded cloths carried the scent of lavender soap, supplied only to the upper servants. On the chair lay a nearly invisible dusting of white powder. She touched none of it. Mrs. Bell. Which servant wears red wool? In winter, nearly all the maids do. Who uses lavender soap? Lady Honora's attendants. She requests it from London. Honora folded her arms. And Clara controls the invoices. Perhaps she placed it there herself. Edmund stared at his sister. Enough. The single word changed the room. Honora looked at him in disbelief. He approached her slowly. Did you know Clara's son was alive? No. Did you sign the payment recorded in that ledger? I already told you it was forged. Then provide a sample of your writing. I will not submit to humiliation inside my own brother's house. You humiliated my wife before this household less than 2 hours ago. Clara studied him. His defense came too late to repair anything, but Honora recognized the shift and recoiled from it. You chose me, she whispered. You said Clara had failed this family. Edmund's face changed as though he had finally heard his own cruelty repeated without disguise. I said many things I had no right to say. Honora's hand moved protectively over her belly. Mother warned me she would turn you against us. At the mention of the Dowager Duchess, Mrs. Pike looked toward the corridor. Where is your mother? She asked. Edmund frowned. The Dowager Duchess had attended breakfast that morning, but she had not appeared for the nursery announcement, an absence no one had questioned. Mrs. Bell hurried to her apartments and returned several minutes later carrying a folded note. She is gone, Your Grace. Her maid says she left before noon. Edmund opened the note. His expression darkened as he read. What does it say? Clara asked. He handed it to her. Honora's confinement must occur before midnight. Once the child is registered, Raventon will finally be safe from Clara's bloodline. Clara read the final words twice. My bloodline. Mr. Harcourt cleared his throat uneasily. Your Grace, there is a provision in the original marriage settlement that may explain that phrase. What provision? If the Duchess produces a living male heir, control of 3 northern estates passes into a trust managed by her until the child reaches 21. Clara stared at him. Those estates contain the Ashbourne silver mines. Yes. Edmund turned on his solicitor. Why was I never informed? You were. I sent the documents to you before the Duchess's first confinement. Clara remembered the package. She had placed it on Edmund's desk herself. He had refused to read it after his mother called the settlement an insult to his authority. His negligence had given the conspirators their motive. A guard entered carrying a bloodied riding glove. Embroidered inside its cuff were the initials L.H. Lucy Hale. We found this near the hunting lodge, he reported. There was also a carriage waiting beyond the trees. Was Lucy inside? The messenger asked. No, but the driver confessed where he had been ordered to take her. The guard looked directly at Honora. To the old dower house where Dr. Vale is hiding. Honora suddenly doubled over. This time, blood appeared on the front of her pale gown. Mrs. Pike rushed forward and caught her before she fell. Honora gripped the midwife's sleeve, terror replacing every trace of defiance. It is too early, Mrs. Pike said. Something has caused the labor. Honora's lips trembled. Then she looked at Clara and whispered, My child cannot be born here. If Vale sees the baby, he will kill us both. Clara stared at Honora's blood-stained gown. The woman might have helped steal Nathaniel. She had certainly watched Clara's humiliation without mercy. Yet the unborn child had committed no crime. Take her to the blue chamber, Clara ordered. It is beside the nursery and has no hidden passage. Edmund lifted Honora into his arms while Mrs. Pike directed the servants. Clara followed with Nathaniel, remaining close enough to hear everything. Inside the chamber, Mrs. Pike examined Honora and announced that the bleeding was serious, though the child might still be saved. What did Vale give you? She asked. Nothing. Mrs. Pike caught Honora's chin. Your pupils are contracted. Tell me now, or both of you may die. Honora began trembling. A tonic. He said it would ensure the child came before midnight. Edmund looked horrified. Why would you want that? Mother said Clara's son was dead. If my child was born while I remained a widow, you could petition Parliament to recognize him as Raventon's heir. You endangered your baby for my title? For our family, Honora cried. Mother said Clara would control the mines if she produced a son. She said you would become a guest on your own land. Edmund stepped back as though she had struck him. Clara remembered every time he had accused her of seeking power. Now she understood whose voice had planted that fear. "When did you learn Nathaniel was alive?" Clara asked. Honora turned her face away. Mrs. Pike pressed a cloth against the bleeding. "Answer her." 3 weeks ago, Lucy saw Vale bringing milk into the old dower house. We followed him and found the child. "And you left him there?" "Mother said he would be sent abroad. You signed the payment after my confinement. I believed it was for a dead infant's burial. Mother covered the rest of the page." It was possible, but Clara would not accept it without proof. Why was Nathaniel moved into the nursery passage? Vale brought him last night. The royal inquiry frightened Mother. She planned to have him declared dead under his own name, bury another infant in the chapel crypt, and place my child in the succession before anyone could challenge it. Clara held Nathaniel tighter. "Who fired through the window?" "I do not know. Vale, perhaps. Or Lucy." A violent pain seized Honora. Mrs. Pike ordered everyone except Clara and 2 maids from the room. Honora caught Clara's sleeve. "Do not leave. You wanted me expelled from Raventon this morning. I know." The simple admission held no excuse. Clara placed Nathaniel in Mrs. Bell's arms and stayed, not for Honora, but because she would not let another child be sacrificed to the Ashbourne succession. For the next hour, she boiled cloths, measured water, and followed Mrs. Pike's instructions. Honora's labor progressed unnaturally fast. The tonic had forced her body before the infant was ready. At last, a tiny girl was born. She made no sound. Mrs. Pike rubbed the child's back, then cleared her mouth. Seconds passed like entire years. A weak cry finally broke through the room. Honora sobbed. "It is a daughter," Mrs. Pike said. "Small, but alive." Clara wrapped the infant and placed her against Honora's chest. Honora looked down at her daughter with wonder, then at Clara with shame. "I let them call you barren," she whispered, "all while your living son was hidden because of me. Your confession must be repeated before the royal messenger." "It will be." A shout rose from the courtyard. Clara went to the window. Guards were returning with a prisoner tied across a horse, but it was not Dr. Vale. It was Lucy Hale. Her shoulder was bloodied, and clutched inside her coat was a bundle of letters bearing the Dowager Duchess's seal. The royal messenger entered moments later. "Lucy claims those letters prove the conspiracy," he said, "but she also says Dr. Vale has gone to the chapel with enough gunpowder to destroy every original record beneath it." Then the chapel bell began to ring. Once, twice. On the 3rd strike, smoke rose from beneath its locked doors. Clara placed Nathaniel in Mrs. Bell's arms. "Take him and Honora's daughter to the Blue Chamber. Lock the door from inside and admit no one except Mrs. Pike or Dr. Reed." Edmund reached for his coat. "You are not going near the chapel. The original birth register may be the only legal proof that Nathaniel is my son. There is gunpowder beneath it. Then do not waste time arguing." Clara hurried downstairs with the royal messenger and 2 guards. Edmund followed, calling for buckets and every able servant in the house. Smoke seeped through the chapel's windows. The front doors had been chained from within, and the side entrance was already burning. Lucy Hale had been placed beneath guard in the courtyard. When she saw the flames, she struggled to stand despite the wound in her shoulder. "There is another entrance," she cried. "Through the family crypt." "Where?" Clara demanded. "Behind the stone angel on the eastern wall." Clara ran around the chapel. Ivy concealed a narrow iron gate behind the weathered statue. Edmund tore at the vines while a guard forced the rusted lock. Lucy called after them. Vale placed the powder beneath the archive room. If he lights the main fuse, the roof will collapse. Inside, stone stairs descended into darkness. Clara took a lantern and led the way. "You should remain outside," Edmund said. "You remained outside when our son was born. I will not do the same when proof of his life is at risk." The rebuke ended his objection. The crypt smelled of damp stone and smoke. Coffins bearing the Ashbourne crest lined both walls. At the far end, a wooden door stood open, revealing the narrow staircase that climbed toward the chapel archive. Halfway up, Clara found a line of black powder running along the floor. "Do not step over it," the messenger warned. Clara followed the fuse with her lantern. It divided at the landing. One branch ran upward toward the records, while the other disappeared through a crack beneath the crypt floor. "There are 2 charges," she said. Edmund knelt beside the first line and carefully separated it with the blade of his knife. A pistol clicked above them. Dr. Vale stood at the top of the staircase. His coat was stained with blood near the ribs, and sweat shone across his face. In one hand he held the pistol, in the other a burning candle. "Move away from the fuse," he ordered. The royal guards raised their weapons, but Vale lowered the flame. "One shot from you, and I drop this." Clara stepped in front of Edmund before she could reconsider. "You hid my son. I kept him alive. You drugged him and prepared his death certificate, because the Dowager Duchess changed the arrangement. The boy was supposed to disappear abroad. When the palace began asking questions, she decided a corpse would be safer." "Where is she?" Vale smiled weakly. "Already beyond your reach." Smoke thickened above him. Behind his legs, flames licked along the archive door. Clara noticed a leather document case strapped across his back. "You did not come here merely to destroy records," she said. "You came to steal one." His expression shifted. "The original marriage settlement," Clara continued. "The document proving the northern estates pass into Nathaniel's trust." Edmund looked at Vale with sudden understanding. "My mother intends to sell the mines." "She already has," Vale replied. "The contracts were signed last month. That land was not hers to sell. It would be once Clara's child was legally dead and Honora's son recognized as heir." "Honora delivered a daughter," Clara said. Vale's face lost its color. For the first time, his candle hand trembled. "The entire scheme has failed," Clara continued. "Put down the flame and testify. It is your only chance to avoid the gallows." "My testimony would condemn me. The forged certificate already does that." A beam cracked overhead. Burning plaster fell behind Vale, showering the landing with sparks. The flame touched the candle's edge. Clara saw his gaze flick toward the powder. "Vale," she said, lowering her voice. "My son cried when he heard Honora, but he did not cry when Mrs. Pike held him. Someone cared for him during those 7 months. Was it you?" His face tightened. "I fed him," he said. "I treated his fever. Your mother-in-law wanted him left at a foundling hospital, but I refused. Then do one decent thing before your crimes bury everyone here. Give me the case." The chapel groaned above them. Vale glanced back at the fire, then down at the fuse. His pistol lowered by an inch. A gunshot erupted from the crypt. The bullet struck Vale's shoulder. The candle flew from his hand and landed directly in the powder. Fire raced along the fuse. Edmund dragged Clara backward as the guards threw themselves against the wall. Vale collapsed on the stairs. The flame reached the point where Edmund had cut the first branch and died, but the second line continued beneath the crypt floor. "Everyone out," the messenger shouted. Clara looked toward the rows of coffins. Beneath the newest stone slab, orange light flickered through a narrow crack. The hidden charge was under the supposed tomb of her infant son. Vale caught her ankle as she passed. "The coffin," he gasped. "There is a body inside, but it is not Nathaniel." Clara tore free and knelt beside the slab. Words had recently been carved into the stone. Nathaniel Ashbourne, beloved son. The date of death matched the forged certificate. "Tomorrow." Edmund seized her shoulders. "We have seconds. Then help me open it." Together, they forced an iron bar beneath the slab. The royal messenger joined them, and the stone shifted enough to expose a powder keg beneath the false tomb. Its fuse was already burning. Clara reached into the gap and pulled it free with both hands. The fire was only inches from the barrel. Edmund snatched the keg, ran toward the open crypt gate, and hurled it into the empty garden. The explosion threw him backward. Clara struck the stone floor. Dust filled the crypt, followed by silence. Then she heard Edmund groan. He was alive. Above them, Dr. Vale crawled toward the burning archive. The leather case was still strapped to his back. Clara climbed through the smoke and dragged him away moments before the ceiling collapsed. The guards carried Vale outside. Edmund staggered after them, blood running from his temple. Clara emerged last, clutching the leather case. Inside was the original marriage settlement, and a bundle of sale contracts bearing Edmund's signature. He stared at them. I never signed those. Clara examined the ink, then the seal. The signature may be forged, she said, but this is your private ducal seal. Edmund touched the empty chain beneath his waistcoat. His seal was gone. Lucy Hale began to laugh bitterly from across the courtyard. You gave it to your mother this morning, she said. You told her to make whatever arrangements were necessary to secure Honora's child as heir. Edmund's face collapsed. Clara now understood the full weight of his choice. He had not known the exact crime, but he had willingly surrendered his authority to the woman who planned it. The royal messenger opened one of the contracts. These mines have been sold to Lord Vane, he said. His men are scheduled to take possession at dawn. Clara looked toward the northern hills. More than 600 workers and their families lived there. If Vane took control before the trust was recognized, he could evict every tenant, strip the silver, and destroy the evidence tying the Dowager Duchess to the sale. Then a stable boy arrived on a foaming horse. Your Grace, he cried, looking at Clara rather than Edmund. Armed men have surrounded the northern estate. They say anyone who resists will be shot. Clara read the sale contract once more. Lord Vane could claim the mines only if the transfer was announced publicly before dawn. The contract required the presence of the estate steward, 2 tenant representatives, and the ducal seal. We can stop this without bloodshed, she said. The miners know me. If they see the original settlement, they will refuse Vane's authority. Edmund wiped blood from his temple. You are not riding into a group of armed men. Those families trusted me long before you remembered they existed. And if Vane orders his men to fire, then you will finally use your title to protect someone other than yourself. The words struck him, but he did not argue again. Clara returned briefly to the blue chamber. Nathaniel slept beside Honora's daughter under Mrs. Bell's watch. She touched his cheek, fighting the instinct to remain. I have just found him, she whispered, and already I must leave. You are securing the home he will inherit, Mrs. Pike said. Clara kissed Nathaniel's forehead and departed with the royal messenger, 6 guards, Edmund, Mr. Harcourt, and Lucy Hale. They carried the original settlement and the forged sale contracts in separate locked cases. The northern mines lay 8 miles away. When their horses reached the ridge, Clara saw torchlight surrounding the workers' village. Lord Vane's men had gathered the miners before the counting house. Women and children stood behind them, while armed riders blocked the road. Vane waited on the steps in a fur-lined coat. Beside him stood the Dowager Duchess. Edmund reined in sharply. Mother. The Dowager looked neither surprised nor ashamed. You should be at Raventon protecting Honora's son. Honora delivered a daughter. For the first time, the older woman's composure cracked. Clara dismounted. Nathaniel is alive. The Dowager's eyes fixed upon her. Then she turned to Vane. Complete the transfer. Vane raised Edmund's missing seal. By the Duke's authority, these mines now belong to me. No, Edmund said. I revoke every power granted with that seal. Vane smiled. You cannot revoke a completed sale merely because your wife has frightened you. Clara climbed onto the counting house platform and faced the workers. The sale is not valid. These lands passed into my son's trust the moment he was born alive. She held up the original settlement. A murmur spread through the crowd. Thomas Reed, the miners' elected foreman, stepped forward. We were told the young lord died. So was I. He was stolen from the nursery and hidden for 7 months. The Dowager pointed at Clara. She presents a foundling and calls him heir. Arrest her. No one moved. Clara handed the settlement to the royal messenger, who read the trust provision aloud. He then displayed the forged certificate bearing tomorrow's date. Vane's confidence faded. Forgery by veil, he said. It has nothing to do with me. Then why did you arrive with armed men before the contract's lawful transfer date? Clara asked. And why does the agreement allow you to close the workers' homes without notice? The miners began closing ranks around their families. The Dowager descended the steps. Edmund, control your wife. He looked at Clara, then at the mother whose ambitions he had mistaken for loyalty. My wife is the only person here who has acted for Raventon. The Dowager slapped him. You weak, ungrateful fool. I preserved your inheritance while she filled your head with accounts and tenant grievances. You stole my son. I saved your title from being governed by her blood. Edmund's face hardened. "You will answer before the crown." Vane drew a pistol and pressed it against the dowager's back. "Give me the settlement," he ordered, "or she dies." The older woman froze, stunned that her ally had turned upon her. Clara watched Vane's grip. His finger rested too heavily on the trigger. Even if the guards fired first, the dowager would be struck. Clara slowly raised the document. "You want the mines, not her life. I want the only paper that can take them from me." She walked forward. Edmund whispered, "Clara, no." When she came within reach, Vane seized the settlement, but Clara had given him the forged sale contract. Before he noticed, Thomas Reed swung a mining shovel against his wrist. The pistol fired into the air. Workers overwhelmed Vane's guards while the royal officers dragged him to the ground. The dowager tried to run. Lucy Hale stepped into her path and held up the bundle of letters. "You promised Vale would spare me," Lucy said. "Instead, you ordered him to shoot me." The dowager's gaze moved toward the woods. A horn sounded from the eastern road. Dozens of mounted soldiers appeared beneath the royal standard. At their head rode a crown investigator, carrying an arrest warrant. But when he reached Clara, his expression was grave. "The palace received another accusation before we left London," he said. "The Duke of Raventon has charged you with abducting an infant and fabricating an heir." Clara turned toward Edmund. He stared back in horror. The investigator unfolded the document. At its bottom was Edmund's genuine signature. Edmund took the accusation with shaking hands. The signature was unmistakably his. Even the long downward stroke beneath his name matched the documents he had signed for years. "I did not write these charges," he said. The Crown investigator remained unmoved. "Did you sign this page?" Edmund examined the lower corner. A faint crease divided the accusation from the signature. His face changed. "This morning, my mother brought me a petition concerning Honora's unborn child. The upper half was covered by another sheet." "You signed without reading it?" Clara asked. "I believed it authorized an inquiry into the succession." "You believed whatever allowed you to replace me most quickly." He could not deny it. The investigator turned to Clara. "Until the accusation is resolved, the infant cannot be formally recognized. You must appear before the Royal Commission at Raventon tomorrow." "I will appear," Clara said. "But Nathaniel remains with me. He will remain under joint royal protection." The Dowager Duchess smiled faintly. She had expected Edmund's signature to undermine every piece of evidence they found. Clara approached her. "Who is the child buried beneath Nathaniel's name?" The Dowager's composure vanished. No one had mentioned Vale's confession to her. "There is no child." Vale said otherwise. "He is a liar." "Then you will not object when the coffin is opened before the commission." The royal investigator ordered the Dowager, Lord Vane, and Lucy transported separately to Raventon. Vane's armed men surrendered after learning the sale contract was disputed by the Crown. Before leaving, Clara addressed the miners. "No family will be removed. No wages will be withheld while the trust is examined. I will place the mine accounts under an independent committee beginning tomorrow." Thomas Reed removed his cap. "We will testify that Vane tried to seize the land by force." The other workers followed him. Clara had arrived as a wife accused of fabricating an heir. She departed with 600 witnesses who knew whose authority had protected them. During the ride back, Edmund kept his distance until they reached the estate gates. "Clara," he said, "I will confess before the commission that I signed without reading. That will damage your title." "It should." She studied him. For years, Edmund had treated public shame as the greatest possible disaster. Now he seemed to understand that truth required a cost. "You must confess everything," she said. "Not only the document." His eyes lowered. "I know." At Raventon, Dr. Reed had completed his examination of Nathaniel. The child's age, curved finger, birthmark, and healed injury from the difficult delivery all matched Mrs. Pike's original description, but his formal report included one troubling detail. "There are repeated needle marks on his left leg," Dr. Reed explained. "He was given laudanum regularly. Withdrawal may cause fever or convulsions." Clara's relief shattered. Nathaniel began crying in her arms. His small body tightened, and a tremor ran through him. Dr. Reed prepared a carefully measured remedy. Clara remained beside her son through the night, cooling his skin and speaking to him whenever his eyes opened. Edmund waited outside the nursery. He did not ask to enter. Near midnight, Honora requested to see Clara. She lay pale and exhausted, her daughter asleep beside her. "I have written my testimony," Honora said. "I admitted that I discovered Nathaniel 3 weeks ago and remained silent. You may be charged as an accomplice." "I know. Why confess now?" Honora looked at her daughter. "Because Clara Ashbourne saved her after I helped steal Clara Ashbourne's child." She handed over a sealed statement, then added, "There is something else. Mother did not act only for the mines." From beneath her pillow, Honora produced a miniature portrait of a young man wearing an army uniform. "Lord Vane's eldest son," she said. "He died 6 years ago. Mother believed your father was responsible. My father died 10 years ago. He left behind a report proving Vane's son sold military information to the French. Mother suppressed it to protect Vane. He has blackmailed her ever since." Clara turned the portrait over. A string of numbers had been written on the back. They resembled account references, but one repeated sequence caught her attention. The same constellation coordinates she had painted across the nursery ceiling. This was not a list of accounts. It was a map. Clara returned to the nursery and compared the numbers with the golden stars. One coordinate pointed to the painted constellation above Nathaniel's original cradle. She pressed the marked star. A small compartment opened in the ceiling beam. Inside lay her father's missing military report and a letter from the Dowager Duchess ordering Lord Vane to ensure Clara never produced a living heir. The letter ended with a final instruction. If the first 2 pregnancies fail to end naturally, Dr. Vale must increase the dose. Clara stared at the words. Nathaniel had not been the first child they tried to take from her. Her miscarriages had been engineered. At dawn, the Royal Commission assembled in Raventon's Great Hall. Miners, servants, physicians, and crown officers filled the room. Clara entered carrying Nathaniel. Edmund walked several steps behind her. The commissioner first examined the accusation bearing Edmund's signature. Edmund rose. "I signed a covered document without reading it because I wanted my sister's child recognized over my wife's objections. The accusation was altered afterward, but my carelessness made the fraud possible. You understand this confession may lead to your removal from the management of Raventon?" "Yes." Clara watched him sit. He did not ask for sympathy. Mrs. Pike testified that Nathaniel had been born alive. Dr. Reed confirmed the child's age, identifying marks and injuries. Honora's written confession established that she had discovered the boy 3 weeks earlier and remained silent. Lucy then produced the Dowager's letters. They detailed payments to Vale, the plan to falsify Nathaniel's death, and instructions to drug Clara during her pregnancies. The Dowager remained expressionless. "Letters can be fabricated," she said. Clara placed her father's military report on the table. It exposed Lord Vane's blackmail and explained why he had helped seize the mines. Vane finally broke. "The Dowager planned everything," he shouted. "She promised me the northern estates if I silenced Vale and destroyed the records." The commissioner ordered both prisoners restrained. "One question remains," he said. "Whose body lies inside the coffin labeled with Nathaniel's name?" The hearing moved to the damaged chapel. Before dozens of witnesses, workers lifted the false tombstone and opened the small coffin beneath it. Inside lay the remains of an infant wrapped in linen marked with Mrs. Pike's embroidery. Clara's knees weakened. Mrs. Pike examined the cloth. This child was buried years ago. Clara noticed a silver bracelet beneath the folds. It bore the date of her second miscarriage. "That pregnancy did not end as Vale told me," she whispered. The physician, brought forward under guard, began to sob. "The child was born alive," he confessed. "A girl. The Dowager ordered me to smother her, but I could not. She died several hours later, from the poison already in Lady Clara's blood." Edmund turned away, shattered. The Dowager finally spoke. "I protected Raventon from being controlled by a woman whose family had already attempted to destroy us." Clara faced her. "My father exposed a traitor. That was not an attack on Raventon. It made Vane our enemy. No, your secrecy gave him power. Your crimes gave him the mines. The commissioner ordered the coffin preserved as evidence and declared Nathaniel the presumed lawful heir pending final judgment. Then a guard rushed into the chapel. "Mrs. Bell has been found unconscious," he reported. "The nursery is open." Clara ran before he finished. She reached the room and found an empty cradle rocking beside the window. Nathaniel was gone. On the blanket lay Edmund's missing ducal seal and a note in the dowager's handwriting: "Withdraw every charge before noon, or your heir will finally receive the burial prepared for him." Clara did not withdraw the charges. Instead, she examined the nursery. The open window was a deception. There were no footprints beneath it, and the rocking cradle had been pushed by hand. On the floor lay a strand of red wool and the scent of lavender soap, the same clues found inside the hidden passage. "The person who cared for Nathaniel also took him," Clara said, "one of Honora's attendants." Mrs. Bell regained consciousness long enough to identify the attacker, Margaret Shaw, the dowager's personal maid. Clara remembered the threat. "Your heir will finally receive the burial prepared for him." "The false tomb," she said. "They are taking him to the crypt." Crown guards surrounded the chapel, but Clara entered through the eastern gate with Edmund and the commissioner. Beneath the damaged tomb, she heard Nathaniel crying. A concealed tunnel led toward the dower house. Clara followed it until she found Margaret holding the child beside another powder keg. The maid carried no pistol, only a lit candle. "Withdraw the charges," Margaret demanded. "The dowager will abandon you as she abandoned Lucy. She promised me money. She promised everyone something. Vale received protection. Vane received the mines. Lucy received safe passage. What did any of them actually receive?" Margaret hesitated. Nathaniel stretched toward Clara. "Give him to me," Clara said. "The commissioner is here. If you save him, your cooperation will be recorded." The maid began to cry. Then she extinguished the candle and placed Nathaniel in Clara's arms. Edmund closed his eyes in relief, but Clara did not look at him. She carried her son into daylight herself. The commission resumed publicly that afternoon. Margaret confessed that the dowager had ordered her to hide Nathaniel, administer laudanum, and remove him if the inquiry failed. The dowager's letters, Vale's testimony, Lucy's evidence, Honora's confession, the forged certificate, and the concealed child's tomb completed the chain. Nathaniel was formally recognized as Clara and Edmund's lawful son. The northern estates were placed into the trust promised by Clara's marriage settlement, with Clara as sole manager until Nathaniel reached adulthood. Lord Vane's sale was voided. The Dowager Duchess was charged with conspiracy, child abduction, attempted murder, fraud, and poisoning. Her personal property was seized for restitution to Clara, the miners, and the village institutions harmed by her scheme. Lord Vane lost the mining contract and faced trial for blackmail and armed seizure. Dr. Vale surrendered his medical license and received imprisonment in exchange for full testimony. Margaret and Lucy received reduced sentences for cooperation. Honora was removed from any role in Nathaniel's succession, but Clara ensured that her newborn daughter retained the inheritance left by her late father. Then Edmund stood before the household, the miners, and the royal commission. "My mother committed the crimes," he said, "but my choices gave her the power to commit them. I ignored my wife's warnings. I refused to investigate our son's supposed death. I called Clara barren and hysterical. I stripped her authority in public, surrendered my seal without reading the documents, and placed pride above truth." He turned toward Clara. "I ask for no forgiveness." Edmund relinquished management of Raventon and transferred Clara's allowance, the village school, and the dispensary into permanent independent trusts. He also petitioned the Crown for a formal separation that granted Clara her own household, complete custody of Nathaniel during his childhood, and freedom from Edmund's interference. 6 months later, Clara moved into the restored northern manor. She expanded the school, reopened the dispensary, and created a fund for miners' widows. Nathaniel recovered from the laudanum and grew stronger each week. Edmund visited only when Clara permitted it. He did not speak of reconciliation. He arrived without authority, spent time with his son under supervision, and left when asked. One evening, Clara entered Nathaniel's new nursery. Golden constellations covered the ceiling, but the walnut cradle was gone. She had donated it to the village orphanage after removing every hidden panel. Nathaniel stood unsteadily beside a small chair, holding Clara's fingers. Outside, workers replaced the iron gate's old Ashbourne crest with a new plaque, the Nathaniel Trust, managed by Clara Ashbourne. Clara lifted her son into her arms and opened the nursery door, not for a duke, an heir, or a family name, but for the life she had chosen to build.